Hello students, welcome to GS Score. My name is Shubhangi Singh and today we are here to discuss OPSC Mains 2022. The subject we'll be dealing with is economics from GS3. Now if we talk about the paper that has been here, so the number of questions that have been asked, from economics are around 8. There are around 8 questions that have been asked, and if you have to gauge the level of questions from this particular subject, I would have to say that they were somewhere in between easy to moderate. If you have already looked at the questions, and we'll be discussing them also in detail, you would understand that there was an extent of concepts, like the very first question, the concept like financial inclusion has been talked about, gender budget has been talked about, but they had to be seen in the light of contemporary relevance as well as current affairs. They were not present in silo in the paper, where the questions were not only centered around the concept, they were dynamic, where the concept was the center and the periphery. When you had to answer it, it also needed to an extent a contemporary relevance, right? So I would place this paper from easy to moderate. The questions were, I wouldn't say the jumpy, scary ones with absolutely new terms. That is something that is very much part of your syllabus and it is outlined there. So I feel students would have been more or less prepared and you would have been at an ease when you would be attempting them. Now, once we are talking about such papers, it becomes important for us to see in the light, that is why we are here to discuss the questions, that how to answer these questions and what are the major things that we should have covered in detail. Now, the first question that we are going to discuss here is the question 4th in GS3 paper, that was, what is financial inclusion? As I said, centered around a concept. Why is it important in the context of the goal of inclusive development? In a specific context, we have to talk about the goal of inclusive development. Name some policies that have been put in place to achieve financial inclusion in India. Now, as soon as I see 20 marks, I would say this is somewhere around 250 to 280 words max. Right? So we have a word limit in place and we have to address all parts of the question if you are hoping to fetch marks there, right? Now, the first part of question directly asks you to tell what is financial inclusion. But do you think that definition is enough? Of course not. You have to explain, you have to lay the ground, you have to relate it to the second part of the question. Why is it important in the context of goal of inclusive development? So when we are introducing the answer, therein we'll not just be defining financial inclusion, we'll not just be talking that how it is a process that ensures financial access to all the sections of the society, but we will also mentioning that how it is important in the context of inclusive development, because it promotes economic growth, it empowers individuals. So that has to be done. So when we are talking about financial inclusion, we also have to lay the clear context that how it is promoting the goal of inclusive development. Now, once we have established the context, it becomes very clear, it becomes very important for you to establish the context, because that will give an idea to the examiner to see that you have understood what has been asked in the question, right? Now, this is where you highlight the importance of financial inclusion and then again redirect it in your points that how it is contributing to inclusive development. For example, one aspect can be economic empowerment, right? This is how we'll be telling that financial inclusion empowers individuals and it gives them access to banking, credit and other facilities. That is how it is contributing to the goal of inclusive development, because once everybody has access to these facilities, they will be on a similar page. So we have to use these points like social equity, development, to reiterate what we introduced our answer with, and highlight the importance of financial inclusion. We have asked why is it important in the goal of inclusive development. So that means we have to highlight the importance and redirect it again that it is linked to inclusive development. We have to also talk about enhanced livelihoods. These are the pointers that should have found place in your answers so that it is a complete answer. Now, if once we address the first part, the second part should majorly talk about some policies that have been put in place. Now we are going to talk about some policies that have been put in place. So one section of your answer was to define financial inclusion and integrate it with the second part of the question, but the next part should be addressing what has been directly asked in the question, not just in terms of enlisting them, but describing that how these policies have helped to achieve financial inclusion. So one of the first one would be obviously Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. That has helped. We can also mention microfinance institutions. We can talk about microfinance institutions, and in this we also need to clearly explain that how they are improvising, how they are giving more access to every other individual of the society. We can also mention payment banks and small finance banks which have increased the accessibility of banking service in the remote areas, in the more areas which is possible. We can also mention the finance literacy camps and direct benefit transfer schemes. So all these will directly address the second part of your question, which talks about the policies. You will not just be naming them, you will be telling that how these, for example, if I'm talking about microfinance institutions, I have to say that the growth of microfinance institution has extended the financial services to the unbanked and the remote areas, So these are the main parts of this question that should have been addressed in around 250 to 280 words. That is the word limit. You shouldn't really go beyond it. The requirement is to understand what exactly is question asking and be precise in your expression about that point, right? With this, we will be moving on to the next question, which is India can realize its potential GDP only if the bottlenecks in the path can be overcome. Comment. Now here we have a directive word. It's very important to pay heed to such directive words and see what are they asking for, right? So once we have a directive here which says comment, we have an open space where you have to give your understanding, where you have to give your own understanding. And the question, if you see this question, again, the question is very much rooted in the analysis of the concept. Contemporary relevance, not very much there, but analysis of the concept. Once you have understood GDP, once you have talked about potential GDP, what is the present scenario in terms of potential GDP? What are the key bottlenecks? What is the way ahead? This is something that lies in the analysis of the concept, and the question, I feel, is pretty much direct. I would place it in the easy category. It can be directly answered, I feel. So if you are addressing the first part, India can realize its potential GDP only if the bottlenecks in the path can be overcome. We have to start with, we have to build the context that yes, India's potential GDP is dependent, contingent upon that effective resolution of these bottlenecks happens, and that is how that these impediments will be addressed, and it is important so that India's full economic potential can be gradually realized. But once we have set the context, we are saying that the potential GDP is obstructed, has been stopped by many bottlenecks. There are many issues that are not allowing the potential GDP to become the real GDP. That is a bottleneck in between. We have to talk about what are the challenges and bottlenecks present. We have to discuss this in detail and mentioning all the dimensions that are around it. A major bottleneck or concern you can mention is infra deficit. That in terms of infrastructure, our economy lacks. We do not have adequate infrastructure including transportation, energy, logistics, which can facilitate the actual requirement of economic activities and productivity. We also have regulatory hurdles. You can use a case study to mention that how the IPR and corporate policies need to be rejuggled and what losses they are leading to, right? So once we are giving out these points, it's just not that we have to explain, we also have to keep reiterating that these are the bottlenecks and how they are inducing a certain amount of loss. Other things in terms of, we have skill gap. These are the dimensions I think that needed to be addressed. Agricultural distress. Then we have secondary sector, jobless growth. All these things will lay a clear background that what you're saying, that yes, these bottlenecks exist and they are leading to loss in the real GDP. They are leading to the loss in potential GDP, and our real GDP lags way behind from our potential GDP. Now, when the question is saying comment, you cannot just elaborate on the challenges and bottleneck and leave it hanging, right? Leave it hanging. It is very important. It is very important that we also suggest what can be the strategies, to overcome this, because as you can see, again, this is a 20 marker question very clearly, again to be done in 250 words, right? So the second part of the question would go to address the strategies to overcome the bottlenecks. Now the issues we have pointed out, they have to be kept in mind when we are suggesting strategies. For example, we have to point out that infrastructure development is the way ahead. It is the way ahead. If we are talking about a huge bottleneck that comes from inadequate infrastructure, we have to ensure that there is infrastructure development. We need to focus on skill enhancement programs, where you can again use a very good example of Skill India program. You can use the example of PM Vishwakarma scheme. All these examples may bring contemporary relevance, bring life to the answer, which is pretty much, as I said in the starting, moving around the understanding of concepts. Then we can also talk about financial sector rejuvenation, investment rejuvenation, labor reforms, government interventions, and once we have mentioned the strategies, then we can conclude on a point that it is crucial to address these bottlenecks where policy coordination and governance is required, government intervention is required, so that India can fully realize its potential GDP. That is how we'll construct the answer in such a way. When you would have attempted, I feel this is very important to understand that the answer should be in a totality. It should be a finished product. It should not be hanging in between. And that is why we say expression is an important part, that you might know it all, but it is important to connect it to the ask of the question and lay it out in such a manner. On this note, let us move to the next question. Next question is critically examine the role of public-private partnerships model for infrastructure development of the country, and cite a few success stories. 15 marker. I would give around 180 to 200 words to this. Now again we have a key directive word here, that is saying critically examine. It is asking you to not just examine, critically examine. And what is the difference in here? It is that once you are looking into the details of the model, you are examining, you are going to look in the positive and negative aspects both. You are going to look in the appraise and criticism as well, right? So when we are talking about role of public-private partnership for infrastructure development, we need to address the positives and critique as well. This is the first part of the question, and this is how it has to be balanced. The structure might vary answer to answer. However, these 2 points are eminent for the demand of the question, and they should be present in your answer. So if we are talking about positives, usually I take 3 F's here, that is finance, flexibility and future. So when we are talking about public-private partnership in terms of infrastructure development, they assure the finance, they assure future, and they assure flexibility, That is how, when we are talking about a public-private partnership, these are the things that are the basis, that are the selling point of these partnership models, and they definitely stand in the positive of it. Whereas when we are talking about these models, they do have success stories, but they do have failure stories also. And what are the limitations that have existed in this model? The problems that have existed in this model: the amount of risk allocation. The amount of risk allocation is higher, and that is why private sector tends to shy away, because the risks are not effectively distributed. Then we also have issue of affordability and accessibility. This issue comes because of the fight of the motive, because there are two motives, profit and social welfare. But if we are wanting to ensure social welfare, affordability and accessibility are important. But in such models, certain extent of compromise is seen in terms of affordability and accessibility. Other than that, motive is not clear, be it profit or be it social welfare. Then the agreements are complex. All these problems can be pointed out when you are critically looking into the role of public-private partnerships model for infrastructure development. And these are the major things that you should have mentioned in terms of infrastructure development. But the second part of the question asks you to directly cite a few success stories which have shown that public-private partnership models have worked, and what are the examples in there. So when you have to address this part, you can use a few examples like Delhi Metro, development of road infrastructure in India, airports, successfully running airports, telecommunications, power sector reforms. All these will be taken in here. Now, this is one of those questions that I'll say, apart from the concept of public-private partnership model, there has to be understanding of the contemporary relevance to it as well. I feel most of the students might have the urge to get into details of the different models, be it BOOT, other models, hybrid model, but the details of different type of PPP is not required as per the question. The question is directly asking about what role this particular partnership model plays in infrastructure development, and you have to critically examine it. It is very direct in the ask, and I feel these are the things that students should directly answer in order to achieve the desired marks. So this will be we'll be done with this question. On this note, we'll be moving to the next question. Now, our next question, again, 15 marks. Seems like a bigger question than the ones we have done, but actually it's not. Let us look into it. The structural change in Indian economy is a case of the missing middle. Now, it is a term with contemporary relevance. Do you think that this kind of structural change can help the economy in becoming a developed one? So, the second part of question is directly asking you, do you think that the missing middle model that is existing can help this structural change that is happening, can help the economy to become a developed one? So, before we get into this, before we get into the second part, first we have to, when we are introducing the answer, we have to address what is missing middle, the phenomena of missing middle, where we have to mention that it is the significant absence of medium industries in between small industries and large scale industries is missing middle, and the structural change that India is undergoing, at present, that is experiencing this phenomena, Now, if we are talking about that, this kind of structural change can help the economy in becoming a developed one. So it is asking for your opinion, but a smart move here would be to again highlight the both possibilities, what can happen out of it and what will be the negative aspects. So you can address the positives like inclusion, rural development, etc. If the missing middle is addressed, and if it is not addressed, that India goes ahead and becomes a developed economy, on basis of this structural change, there will be certain issues that you might face. You should also mention them. And this question, many students might think that it is centered around making answer about missing middle. No, it is talking about the impact of missing middle on India in becoming a developed economy, in terms of becoming a developed economy. So if India goes for addressing this, there will be positives like inclusion, rural development, employment generation, competitiveness, etc. However, if India undergoes to become a developed one with the missing middle, there will be certain issues like access to finance, there will be regulatory burden, and all this needs to be addressed. Now, such questions, sometimes I feel, I have talked to a few students, they were like, we were taken aback by the term as soon as the term missing middle was mentioned. So in such scenarios, it is understandable that given the limited amount of time you have in order to write the answer, it is absolutely understandable that sometimes to put information in your brain or to analyze the information in the fidget of time, it's not possible. You might find it difficult, but at the same time, it is one of my students who was not aware of this term, but because of the necessity to write answers, otherwise you will miss on the overall marks that you would need, they decided to go for it, and the understanding they had of missing middle in terms of industries was correct. So that was a chance that person took in that moment in terms of it to understand what missing middle might mean, giving it a due thought. And medium industries, small scale industries, this has been in conversation, and that is how she took out the meaning of this term and went ahead to write the answer, right? So when you are concluding, you have to mention that while becoming a missing middle can contribute to the country's development. However, we have to ensure that nothing is compromised. Encouraging growth of medium-sized industries, it is to be accompanied with proper targeted policy measures as well. It has to be sustainable and inclusive, and missing middle is something that needs to be addressed. With this, we'll be moving on to the next question, that is growth process in India has exacerbated, that is increased, rather than bridging the existing inequalities. So the question says that growth process, instead of decreasing the inequalities, has rather increased them, and you have to give your views with the justification. So whatever your views are, you have to justify them, right? So if you agree to this statement that yes, that inequalities have increased instead of decreasing, you have to provide a justification. If you say they have decreased, then yes, you have to provide your justification. Again, 15 marks, I would say somewhere around 180 to 200 words. That should be your word limit. Now, when we are talking about growth process and how it has contributed to inequalities, the introduction has to mark this, yes, that economic growth has shown notable surpassing the economic growth, the era we are in. We are seeing notable economic expansion, but I feel more we should be on the side that it has increased the existing inequalities, and there are several justifications that you can explain. For example, when you have said this, you have to put in your examples. You have to show how wealth disparities exists. You also have to explain how social disparities exist. And then you have to also address the regional disparities that exist. Now, when we are talking about wealth disparity, we can talk about the difference in income in terms of urban, rural, then skewed income distribution, where you can mention how 1% wealthiest percent of the Indian population has majority of resources over and above 40%. That is skewed income distribution. Then when you will be putting in such facts, that will be the justification which the question is asking from you in terms of your view. The question is asking for a justification. When we talk about social inequalities, we can highlight the differences which exist in terms of healthcare, the state of healthcare, and in terms of education. That can be elaborated, that how there is unequal access and how the economic growth is not translating into improved healthcare accessibility. And when we are talking about regional disparities, or we are referring, we can also use the urban, rural, and we can also look into the state-wise differentiation. Recently, there has been a survey, household consumption expenditure survey, in which it has highlighted that monthly per capita expenses of Sikkim is around 10,000 to 12,000, whereof Chhattisgarh it is around 2,500. So it also highlights the regional disparities. Further, you can move and elaborate on structural disparities, where we can highlight gender disparities, where also we can look into the informal sector challenges. We can talk about policy issues that exist and because of which this inequality is further increasing. So whenever we are asking for such answers, a question like this, you have to address the multidimensional aspect. You cannot just say, yes, the inequality is increasing. In terms of decreasing, you have to show the presence of inequality in all the dimensions. As we say, the answers need to be multidimensional, the coverage needs to be multidimensional there, which shows that you have the openness to see what are the things that are going around, right? With this, we have addressed this question. On this note, when you will be concluding, I would suggest when you will be concluding, before moving to the next question, it would be better to reiterate that yes, your view is this. However, there are certain, in a suggestive or way ahead form, you can suggest that how there are certain steps which are being taken to address it. There are certain, it's not all bad. So you can conclude on a comparatively positive note. With this, we'll be moving to the next question. Now, next question. How does gender budgeting act as a strategy for achieving women empowerment? Again, a 15 marker. 180 to 200 is something the word limit should be around. Now, when we are talking about such questions, first of all, it becomes important for the student who is answering this question to know what exactly gender budget is. Gender budget, what does it do? What are the objectives it is trying to fulfill? And that is when it can connect it to the next part of the question, which says that gender budgeting is a strategy for women empowerment. So if you agree with this, then you have to explain how does gender budgeting is being used as a strategy, right? You have to explain how it is a strategy, and you have to give your dimensions accordingly. So if we say ki yes, it is not asking a yes or no question, it is saying how does. So that means yes, gender budgeting is a strategy, but how does it do? How does it do? So we can use pointers where we mention, where we clearly highlight that there are various mechanisms in the gender budget which promote women empowerment, For example, allocation for women-centric programs. Allocation for women-centric programs. Then addressing the gaps in education. Now, all this will be done through gender budget. These are the mechanisms in gender budget, but they will be empowering women. These steps will be empowering women. Other steps of gender budget: promoting child and mother health. Agricultural involvement, skilling, access to healthcare. So gender budget has provisions and allocations which are made to assure that these things are delivered to the suppressed gender here, and it not only talks about allocations in terms of money, but it also talks about addressing their social condition. It also talks about addressing violence against women. It also talks about ensuring safety. And all these dimensions will continue to highlight, will continue to empower women, and this is the link that we have to put forth. Now, most of the students, as I feel again in the questions, they are stuck in the idea that if the question has the word gender budgeting, then we have to get into the details. Like I said, for PPP models, you do not get into the details of that. You address what the question is asking to you, because you have to remember the word limit here is limited. So you have to convey that you have understood the question, you have understood the context, you know how to introduce, and whatever has been demanded in the question has been put forth in your answer. On this note, we'll be moving to the next question. The next question is state specific. It is state specific. Odisha is the pioneering state in starting the Odisha Millet Mission. Discuss the rationale, objectives, and major achievements of the program. Now, this is a question that is state specific also, as well as rooted in current affairs. It is rooted in current affairs, but I would expect people who were preparing thoroughly, this was not something that would have taken them by surprise. This is something that is doable. Now, when we are talking about introducing this question, the first statement in the question has the context which needs to be established. That Odisha Millet Mission is a pioneering initiative. It is an important initiative that was launched in 2017, and you have to establish that why it makes Odisha a pioneering state. It makes Odisha a pioneering state because if you can use certain data and facts. You can mention that how National Family Health Survey 4 pointed out that the maximum of stunting that was seen, Odisha was among the prominent states. Odisha was among the prominent states. However, after the introduction of this mission, over 3 to 4 years, if you see the data of 2021-22, this has been addressed. So you have to reiterate what the question has already pointed out first, and then we can move into discussion of the rationale of the objective. The rationale again finds its roots in the fact there were many key issues. Many key issues, not only in production of millets, but also hunger and health. Furthermore, farmers' productivity. The issues in amongst all of this is the actual rationale of this program, which will be addressing not only the health of children and adults in terms of health, hunger, but also ensuring productivity in terms for farmers, and production of millet cycle will also be addressed. Then the question is pretty much straight, where it is asking for rationale, objective and achievement. So if you talk about objective, it was looking into promoting the household consumption of millets. It was talking about improving the productivity of millet crop, promoting the FPOs, which are associated in marketing, that is farmer profit organization. So they also need to be looking into the marketing part, setting up of processing units so that the marketing is ensured, and inclusion of millets in the schemes, for example midday meal scheme. Then we have PDS, ICDS. All this was objective of this particular program. Now if you talk about the major achievement, it can be understood by the impact. As I quoted a small data that Chhattisgarh decided to follow millet mission on the lines of Odisha millet mission, because again, as compared to Odisha, Chhattisgarh is drier. Is drier in terms of rainfall, and Odisha has also been awarded the best millet promoting state. So when you're talking about achievements, all these need to be mentioned, that it has been introduced in midday meal scheme, millet Shakti cafes have been opened, income generation has been higher. You can introduce that how gross value of produce per farmer has increased almost over 3 times. All these needs to be mentioned in detail for the achievement, right? Now if you see all the questions that have been asked till now, this is the only question which was from agriculture. Out of 8 questions, only 1 question that was asked from agriculture, and that too was state specific. Right? So the idea of pointing out the syllabus map for you, that it has been, you understand how the questions are being distributed over. On this note, we'll be moving to the next question. The next question says that Jawaharlal Nehru termed heavy industries and plants. So Jawaharlal Nehru termed heavy industries and plants as temples of modern India. And it says, do you agree? So you can agree to it and you can not agree to it. but the answer would not be again in a yes or no. You would have to give your justification that heavy industries and plants, are they all positive and they can be considered as pious and pure as temples are, or there are certain negatives which are associated, which need to be kept in mind, and they might not be as good as they seem. So if you agree, so you have to give in your justification, which can be highlighted in terms of economic development. You can also point out technological advancement, infrastructure development, technology. But if you disagree, then we also need to have points in our hand. For example, environmental concerns, inclusive development, the issue of inclusive development. What about the social impacts, movement, displacement of tribals, etc. But even if you agree or disagree, the conclusion where you would be drawing, it would depend on the fact how much value we are giving to overall industrialization, and if we are not looking in the negatives or positives at all. So it cannot be in totality. Yes, you would have to choose to agree or disagree, but when you're concluding or when you're closing down your answer in totality, you have to mention that even if you agree, but there are certain negatives that need to be kept in mind and that need to be addressed. Or if you're disagreeing, you have to mention that there are certain positives which can be made out of a bad particular place, right? This was the last question. We have discussed all the questions in here, and as you can see, as I said in the start itself, the question did not have any jump scare questions. The question paper did not have any jump scare questions. The questions were majorly in and around the topics that are very clearly mentioned in your syllabus, and if you have seen our micro listing, you will find it there as well. But at the same time, they were not static. They had certain amount of dynamicity included in them, and it required a little bit of analysis and in critical thinking so that you can address what exactly the question was asking. On this note, I'll conclude today's session. If you have any doubts, you can put it down in the comment. We'll address that. Thank you so much for joining in.